Meine Damen und Herren, Edward Snowden gibt uns Einblick in eine, für, ich denke, alle von uns verborgene Welt. Die Welt der staatlichen Überwachung. I would like to start anyhow now with one question that many of us here and by email before have asked us to ask you. And the question is, how are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. In fact, in 2013, when I was working at the NSA, and I witnessed what was going on, and that the public didn't know about it, and in fact, our most senior officials had been lying to us, I realized that the only choices I had at this point in communicating this information to the public so that we, in sort of a larger democratic system, could have a debate and actually decide if this was right or if it should change, would expose me to a lot of risk. I expected to spend the rest of my life in prison. If you've watched Citizen4, the documentary that actually had one of the journalists who was in the room with me when we were first going through these details, it makes it quite clear, because you can see it actually happen, that there was no real plan for the day after tomorrow. I simply did what I felt that I was morally obligated to do, and then the step from there was see how the world ended. Now, I did not expect my government to cancel my passport when I was en route to Latin America and actually strand me in Russia. That would seem to be the absolute last place in the world they would want an American former intelligence officer. But it turns out my government, many other governments, institutions, whether they're corporate or governmental or anything else, don't always think in the long term. Sometimes they react to the nearest emergency, and that's how we end up with the decisions that we got. But what is extraordinary is in my former life, I was always thinking about, tomorrow. What I was going to do next week, what I was going to do next month, how do I plan for retirement, how would I take care of my family, what would the future look like? The most wonderful part of ending up in sort of the life of a fugitive is that you stop thinking about tomorrow. You only think about today. You focus on what's here, what you can do now, and how you can participate and how you can drive change. And because of that, I actually am more fulfilled now in practically every facet of my life than I was before. And if you make yourself more difficult to attack than your competitors, if you make yourself less attractive as a target than other peers, you are more likely never to get this level of intrusion. This same scheme could be used to protect your customer records, could be used to protect the confidentiality of your operations by leaving your business headquartered where it's at, but in fact offshoring your data to a jurisdiction that actually has better laws, that protects you from these compelled jurisdictions. Or at least it's headquartered there. The data could still physically be resident, for example, in Switzerland, but operated by a company that's offshore. And this way, you can ensure that you, the business, are the one who is able to actually direct the operations of your business. You get to make decisions about how your business should operate, how you can comply to best benefit your customers, your enterprise, while also not cutting out your obligations to law enforcement, not terminating your cooperation with legitimate court orders. Because, of course, these will be delivered to you, and you, the business, will have the ability to choose how to respond. That would be the current state of play, I would say, that we're dealing with right now. The question, ultimately, for everyone in the room, is to think about what will you do, and ultimately, what kind of world would you like to live in? Thank you.
Is there direct links between government surveillance and economic espionage?
Yeah. First off, for the second one, it's no longer in controversy that even governments that we would consider to be the more respected governments, perhaps I'm making an assumption there as an American, but I like to think that many people do still have a positive image of the United States. If governments that we would consider to be leading Western democracies are engaged in this kind of economic surveillance, and quite recently there was a story published by WikiLeaks that was about the United States spying on Japanese trade officials to understand what their strategies would be for negotiations over the price of cherries, the fruit. And it's this kind of thing where you go, if they'll spy on a very closely allied government over the price of cherries, what won't they spy on? We see challenges here with endpoint security today. What I mean by endpoint, right, is you've got computer A and computer B somewhere in the world that are trying to communicate with each other across the internet. The network path, the story of 2013, is that that path is hostile. Encrypt everything, and now instead of those communications happening electronically naked, they're happening under a suit of armor. So it's much safer for you, your customers, and everyone else. But then you've got the problem of the endpoints, right? This is the reason that you need to start thinking about your endpoint security, your communication security, because you need to think about what is the maximum value that an outside actor could extract from our company, and what percentage of that could we afford to lose before we can no longer continue to operate. The main thing that happens is we get in through email, because people are trained to click through warnings. They don't want to deal with that. Just double click the attachment, see what's in there. You need to make sure that the people who are working for your company who are opening attachments, first off, those attachments are getting opened in a sandbox, in some kind of virtual jail, in a memory space where they can't access system files, they can't do anything else. Failing that, if you can't do that in your own infrastructure, you need to make sure that once this local endpoint, the person who opened the malicious attachment, is infected, now they can't get off that system.
Edward, there is no more time for you to answer the last question, because
please, we'll go a little over time. Give me one last question.
I find it's a big one. It's a big one. Okay. I'll interrupt you because at least you shall get our best wishes and the applause from the audience before you have to run. So the question is, what would you do differently today? I mean, from your current experience regarding whistleblowing and everything you did, what would you do differently today?
For me, it took me an incredible amount of time to reach the psychological point where I not only realized that I could do something about what I witnessed, which was the government of the United States violating the Constitution of the United States in secret. But not only once I realized I could do something about it, but reaching the point where I was comfortable morally and ethically feeling that not only could I do it, but that I should. And in the meantime, we saw things that were extraordinarily damaging. We saw, in the wake of 2013, if you see something wrong, if you were witness to any kind of wrongdoing, serious wrongdoing, criminal activity, fraud, waste, or abuse, it doesn't matter whether it's happening in government. It doesn't matter whether it's happening in a corporation. If you see something and you believe you can honestly do something to change it for the betterment of society, it will be risky. You will bear the cost of doing it. But at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. And I still believe that. Thank you.